In May 1970, George was the sole survivor of 14 passengers in the crash of a military plane en route to Spokane, Washington. Ascending through 3,000 feet, the aircraft experienced rapid decompression and massive structural failure, crashing in the hills near Shellville, California, where I just mentioned, just north of Sonoma Raceway. Severe burns and multiple internal injuries kept him in intensive care for 90 days, where he had 2 near-death experiences and spent 18 months in the hospital. He was medically retired from the Air Force in 1971. In George's fight to stay alive, his attitude was, "I'm not quitting, not giving up." People who come to know him and who have watched and listened to him are glad he didn't give up and quit. He was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, home of the 6-time Super Bowl champions, the Pittsburgh Steelers. This former outstanding high school and college athlete and Air Force Vietnam veteran learned early in his life that failure isn't falling down, but staying down. George is the author of four books and has appeared on radio stations in Canada, around the U.S., including several Arizona TV stations. He feels grateful and blessed that God gave him a second chance to live. He saw the bridge, he saw the light, and believes we all have guardian angels. Yeah. George lives in Scottsdale, Arizona with his beautiful wife, Olga, and his rescue dog, Angel Ray. Today, he shares his message of faith, hope, overcoming adversity, taking responsibility, and playing it forward. Please give a hearty GGBC welcome to Captain George Burk. Take it away, George.
Good morning. Good morning, Captain. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Everybody hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Well, thank you. It's nice to be back with the Golden Gate Breakfast Club. I mentioned to Captain Bill last night when we did a test call and I had a chance to visit with him. I thought I'd start real quickly with how this all came about. Through a cousin of Captain Bill's family, I met a Vietnam Marine named Pete Kramer, who's a retired firefighter up in Sun Valley, Idaho. 25 years ago, one of my speaking engagements. Fast forward to the summer of 2009, Bill contacted me, invited me to speak at the GGBC at the Marine Memorial Club. I thoroughly enjoyed it. In 2012, he's a masochist, so he invited me back to deal more pain. So I'm back for my second visit. Prior to my second visit, I asked him if he would be interested to help me try to find a crash site. Although I visited the crash site with the rancher that found me on fire, more about that a little later. It was a surreal experience. It was 1974, and I really didn't have a good idea where the Mangles Ranch, at that time was Mangles Ranch, right off the Arnold Highway, was located. He said, "Sure, absolutely." Well, he said I would like to bring someone along, Hugh Tuck, aka Sir Hugh of Atlas Engineering. So we set out. Right one morning, I think Bill met me at the airport that time, and I spoke. And then we set out. I had a late afternoon flight back here to Phoenix, across the Golden Gate, Sausalito, Mill Valley, right on Highway 37. And we stopped a couple places and didn't have a whole lot of luck. Then we went past what used to be just a flashing yellow light back in 1970, where the racetrack is now, Arnold Drive. Hooked a left, went northeast. Saw the Ramsgate Winery on the right-hand side. Just beyond the Ramsgate Winery, there was a closed gate, locked, with 2 stone pillars, and there's a phone number. And Bill pulled his SUV in, his Toyota SUV in, and got the number and called the number, and it was a lady by the name of Maura Roche, the Rocher wineries up in Sonoma. And he, who, what, where, when, why, how. And she said, yeah, I remember the crash. And he said, I got Captain Burk next to me. He's about ready to lose it. He put me on the phone with her, and we chatted. She was 14 years old. Her brother used to ride the horses up there in that area, the crash site location. So the three of us had lunch at the Ramsgate Winery, drove in to Sonoma, met Mara Rocher at the wine tasting room, had a very nice visit for about an hour, and I think it was a 1700 flight out of SFO. So she gave me a series of names with the Sonoma Land Trust, and Nancy and Tony Lilly, that were the next door neighbors. They still live there. They have a cattle ranch and grow grapes. Tall G Ranch, I think it is. So on the way down Arnold Drive, skedaddling down 37, hook up with the freeway to go to the airport. I'm calling these people, introducing myself on the cell phone. I didn't know them. I didn't think they knew me. I gave them Mara Rocher. I gave them the whole drill about the crash and me and the sole survivor. I'd like to come back, etc. Well, over the next 6 weeks, there were numerous phone calls and emails with people, Bob Neal, Wendy Elliott with the Land Trust, Captain Bill. What it came down to was in August of 12. A group of us mustered right inside the gate. Mara showed up and unlocked the gate early. I met her. I met her brother. I met Nancy and Tony Lilly, who Nancy grew up in that area just adjacent to the then Mangles Ranch. Bob Neal, Wendy Elliott showed up later, and I walked the crash site for about an hour. And I had an epiphany as I was gathering my emotions. I thought I wrapped a bow around that puppy and filed it away, but it came back, and all the memories and the trees and the tree line. And so I said, what do you guys think about some sort of a bronze plaque on one of the trees on the Lilly property? And he said, no, that wouldn't work because of the tree, etc. Anyway, Bob Neal and Wendy Elliott said, we'll be your boots on the ground. We'll help you in any way we can. So the result of that is in August of 2014, there were about 50 people that showed up on the bluff that overlooks the crash site and dedicated a crash site memorial bench on what is now Sonoma Land County Foundation land. There's plaques. That's the genesis of how I met Bill and what he and Sir Hugh and so many other people helped me, devoted their time and their energy and fuel, driving me around and driving us around to try to find the crash site, which we did. That story in detail is at my website, georgeburk.com, burk.com. And on the right side of the website, you'll see a picture of me standing behind a memorial bench. And you just, if you so inclined, click the picture. Sorry. And that'll tell you the story. It's 7 pages, but it took 7 pages to do proper justification to all the people that helped me. There were family members that I've met over the years. One came from Hamilton, New Zealand. His sister came from the Cornwall, UK. There's some that still live in the area, in Sonoma, Santa Rosa. So it was a very nice event. Now to the story. 18 months after I come back to Vietnam, Da Nang, I was assigned to what was then, some of you may remember, Hamilton Air Force Base. And at Hamilton was the Western Communications Region headquarters. I was tasked as team chief of an air traffic control analysis team. We basically got military T-29 and or come back the same airplane or come back commercial to many of the bases on the West Coast, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Arizona, all of California, a few in Washington. While I was on my last trip, I had my orders to go to the Far East, to Kadena. It was May 4th, 1970. The weather was very bad, what they call walks off, visibility in the sky obscured. Would normally be a 10-minute drive from base housing to the flight line. Took about 20 minutes because of the fog. And we mustered on the airplane, and our pilot, Robbie, was late coming from San Jose because of the traffic and the fog. He was the base commander of an ACNW site on the mountain above San Jose. And we got on the airplane. I'm going to condense for time. There's a lot of details, a whole lot of details. Got on the airplane, buckled up, began our taxi, sat down the end of the departure runway to get what they call special IFR departure from San Francisco Center. And it was always piped into the airplane. We could hear what was going on, air traffic control wise. Anyway, we took off. I sat historically on that airplane right through the structural bulkhead. There were 4 airline type seats with tables and an artificial bulkhead where the other guys on the crew and the plane were seated, and then bench seating across from me and were next to windows, et cetera. And I always sat on the aisle seat bulkhead. We took off into the soup, and the sun started to come through the clouds and get very bright. And I put my GI issue sunglasses on my head, and I yelled over the roar of the engines of 2 senior NCOs. Senior Master Sergeant Kenny Yarger was across from me next to a window. And next to me was Master Sergeant Freddie Adams. I wanted to talk about the trip, but I wanted to take a nap. It was an early Monday morning. The weather kind of equated to the overall physiology where a lot of us were still asleep. I laid my head crossed my arms on the table in front of me and lowered my head. And from that point on, time just compresses. As it turns out, it was about 9 minutes and 2,900 feet when the window cracked next to Kenny on 45-degree angle from me. I raised my head quickly. About 3/4 of the way up, the window cracked like a spider leg. I don't know if it was the inside or outside window. And over the roar of the engines, I yelled at him, "You better go forward and tell Pappy we may have a problem." Little did I know. He unbuckled, still had his Air Force raincoat on, and he went forward to tell our crew chief, Pappy, that we were having a problem. And he wasn't gone maybe 30 seconds. Again, the compression of time. When I heard a only louder, more pronounced, and then boom. And it was unlike any noise I'd ever heard. Excuse me. The airplane decompressed. Now, an airplane does 3 things. It pitches, it yaws, and it rolls. And as soon as that airplane decompressed, the negative G was so great that I just happened to be looking down the aisle at one of my good friends, Major Bob Ward. It's like the elevator when you go from the 10th floor to the 1st floor very quickly. That negative G was so great that his left leg was thrust up over his head. All the windows were blown out. The airplane was pitching, yawing, and rolling, making a lot of noise, wind. I could hear the engines going. Brr, 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 brr. I glanced quickly to my left, off number 2 engine. I glanced quickly to my right, which would be number 1 engine, and the props were windmilling. The flames were lapping over and under the engine cowling. I unbuckled my seatbelt. I stood up. I did a 180-degree turn. I grabbed a hold of the structural bulkhead doorway, and I saw Kenny coming back up the aisle at me. The wind shear was so great, his Air Force raincoat was like a flag from his armpits out. I glanced quickly into the cockpit. I saw Pappy with the door handle down, trying to keep the stairs from severing. I saw a strip of daylight. The nose of the airplane had been split open. The top of the canopy was split back and was flapping. My boss, Colonel Eldridge G. Shelton, always wore his orange flying suit. He was flying as co-pilot. The yoke, half the steering wheel was going back and forth, left to right violently. The instrumentation panel was back on his lap. The left side of the cockpit was completely open, blown out. And although I do not consciously remember seeing Robbie decapitated, his head was off at his neck. Something from the inside of the airplane, obviously, I presume, broke free. And so I sat back down on my seat and buckled my seatbelt. And there, over the years, several people asked me, what was their last conscious thought do you remember having? And the last conscious thought I remember having was, I hope my insurance policies are intact. Because my ex-wife and I had three small children. Walter was 6, Emily was 4, and Scott was 3. And I had all of $10,000 worth of life insurance, plus whatever the Air Force would pay on my death. And that was my last conscious thought. The airplane pitching and running and rolling, and all of a sudden, impact, if you will. And I was thrown violently back against the structural bulkhead behind me. And the airplane was twisting and bending. And I still remember the noise, the sound. And the airplane stopped moving. And I was, from my waist up, my trunk up, my face, my upper part of my body was whiplash from the back to the front. And my face violently hit the table in front of me, in front of us. Ended up, it broke my nose. And I remember on the way down, Freddie hollered, my God, we're not going to make it. I unbuckled my seatbelt. After the plane stopped moving, I pivoted towards the aisle to my left. I started to get up, and I felt a great deal of heat, like someone was throwing buckets of scalding hot water on me. It was flashover from the fire. Then everything goes black. Next thing I know, I'm outside the airplane, just a few yards from the burning wreckage, face down. Didn't know where I was, didn't know what had happened, thought I was having a bad dream. I rolled over my back. I looked at my hands. My hands were charred black. The skin on my left hand was worse than my right. I remember looking down at my shoes, my low quarters. The laces in my left shoe were gone. And the laces in my right shoe were still tied. I thought I heard somebody crying for help inside the airplane. I rolled back on my stomach, and I was perpendicular to the aircraft. It was still burning. And I did a 180-degree crawl on my elbows and my knees from basically the 12 o'clock position to the 6 o'clock position. I came right close to the skin of the airplane. And I heard a hissing noise and muffled explosion. And then again, another flashover, great deal of heat on my face. And I remember thinking, there's nobody alive on that son of a bitch. I better get back where I came from. So elbows and knees counterclockwise, crawling over what turned out to be pieces of airplane and eucalyptus tree. I looked to my left. I saw our Pappy, our crew chief. He was badly burned and puncture wounds. And off to my right at 2 o'clock position, about 15 yards away, underneath the area of the grove of eucalyptus trees that were on fire. Excuse me. And Bob was black and dead, and smoke's coming off his body. And I know if I laid there, I told myself, lay here, you're going to die. Get on your feet. And I started cursing at myself, exhorting myself, get on your feet, you fat. No, I wasn't fat, but you fat this. And so I started to get up, and I felt a terrible pain, lower part of my back. And I reached back as best I could. And I thought, oh my God, my back's broken. Well, it was fractured. I turned and I waved my arms over my head and, hey, anybody alive, anybody alive? The airplane had burned through. About half was burned through. We had 1,500 gallons of aviation fuel on board. And Magnesium and fuel burn very quickly, and so does the human body, as I found out. So I saw a grove of saw some waist-high prairie grass down this pasture, this hill. I didn't know where I was. Still trying to grasp the magnitude of what had happened. Thought I was having a dream. And I managed, I thought to myself, if I get down in this waist-high prairie grass, that'll help keep me warm because I was going into shock. And I felt life leaving me. I knew I was dying. I sensed it. I knew it. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know if anybody was going to find me. I was all alone. And I never had that before or since. The deep psychological aspect, the deep feeling of being alone. So I'm down in this waist-high prairie grass and shaking and wondering and praying. And as it turned out, I laid there for about 40 minutes. I ran my good hand through my hair and I saw white ash appear across my face. And from my neck up, I thought I was being stung by millions of bees. I looked at my hands. I remember thinking to myself, you must look like hell. And all the while I knew, I felt, I knew, I sensed my body, I was dying. Life was leaving me. Then I heard voices from below me. And I forced myself on my feet a second time and I waved my arms over here, fell back down in the heap. And it was two volunteer firefighters from Shelville. Richard St. Laurent, who I met a number of years later. He was new and used car salesman at Bob Noble Chevrolet in Sonoma. And another young man who I met around the same time. I'm unfortunately don't remember his name. Anyway, I'm laying there and I'm shaking and the grass is shaking and I'm saying, what about my face? What about my face? And one of them looked at me and said, oh my God. And then I started, you really look like all the curse words. And so when this was all going on, I didn't know anybody had found me. No one did for 8 months. John Davio went back. Let me back up. Every Monday morning, he told me in 1974 when I met him for the first time. That's really, really emotional. He didn't know who I was. I told him, Mr. Davio, the last time you saw me, I was on fire. He ran over to me and grabbed a hold of me and started crying, and I started crying. And Mrs. Davio ran out of the ranch house, and Laura, the 15-year-old daughter, ran out of the ranch house right there. And he took me up in his four-wheel drive pickup truck the morning when he found me that morning and told me the story. He was every Monday morning for about 20 plus years. He would sit out in his four-wheel drive pickup truck to try to find dead and stray cattle. It was a 2,000-acre working ranch then, the Mangles Ranch. The weather was so bad that morning, May 4th, 1970, he cut short his trip and came down through a ravine that he had never been through before. And he smelled smoke. What are the neighbors doing burning in a day like today, he thought to himself. Well, he could have continued down the ravine thinking the neighbors were burning something, and I literally would have burned to death within a minute or two. But he turned his pickup truck 90 degrees to the right and lurched it up over the other side of the ravine. And he saw a tail of an airplane, raced in, jumped out, found me on fire, rolling on the ground. Grabbed dirt, sand, wherever he could, and put out the fire. Then went back to the ranch house, took him about 40 minutes over unpaved road through pasture land. Called Hamilton, called the highway patrol. By the time he got back to the crash site, he told me the first responders had just arrived. So he saved my life. And he told me many times that I saw him over the years, about 12 times. He passed away in a week shy of his 90th birthday in 2005. That God sent me to find you. And I went, really? I said, I'm glad he did. Well, my life took on a whole, I didn't know at the time, but my life set me on a whole different journey. And when we went back to the ranch, I spent a weekend with him, and we've often, when we were alive, he'd always bring up the fact that he had a fifth of Jack Daniels, and quote unquote, we really did some damage on that one. And I said, yeah, we did. So while this was going on, they scrambled a Coast Guard helicopter from SFO, come into Hamilton, picked up a PJ, Air Force Rescue, with the red beret. I work with them real close at Da Nang. They couldn't find a crash site. So Mom Davy told me she heard a helicopter. She ran out of the ranch house and was waving her towel. And she said a man opened the door. It was the crew chief leaning out, and he lifted his visor, and she pointed back into the northeast. So they lifted up. The prop wash was blowing her back, and they went back and nape of the earth, just right back into the ridge lines and right into the crash scene. I do remember them putting me on a gurney into the Coast Guard helicopter. Staff Sergeant Rescue asked them some questions about people that I knew at Hamilton. Crack, my first introduction to morphine. They took me back to Hamilton on a gurney, took me down to the x-ray, laid me on a cold hard x-ray table, and were concerned about my vertebrae and my fractures. They didn't know about burns. I didn't need more radiation. Of course, I didn't know that, and I wasn't going to argue with them. They did that, and they took me back up to the emergency room, and that's when I saw my ex-wife, my left shoulder, and Lieutenant Colonel Joe Johnson, my immediate supervisor, off my left shoulder. I mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." They took me down to the flight line in the Blue Air Force ambulance with some of the medical crew from Hamilton. I remember thinking to myself, always wanted to ride in one of these things, but never back here. I was still what was left of my 1505s. We're in the tarmac at Hamilton, the flight line. I heard the noise and the smell, and I said to myself, "That's JP4, and that sounds like a C-141." Well, it was. Suddenly, 4 guys dressed in white scrubs show up, lift me out of the back of the ambulance, carry me across the tarmac, up into the back of the C-141. The doors close, the lights come on. They strap me into the white side of the fuselage. I notice there's other people around in that cargo bay. Engine start. The morphine had begun to wear off, and I was starting to feel the sensation of the burns and the cold and the fear and the doubt and the anxiety and my aching. Off to my right, I saw a real pretty blonde flight nurse. And I thought she was coming over to talk to me. Arrogant. She said, "Open your mouth." I opened my mouth. She put ice chips in my mouth. And I thought, inside I'm laying here blanking, dying, and you're giving me blanking ice chips. What the blank is going on, in my mind? Well, when you're burned, you lose a lot of body weight, a lot of fluid. And the skin is the largest, your epidermis is the largest defense mechanism we have in our body. You lose water and you just accelerate your demise. Well, everything shut down. More morphine. Next thing I know, I'm squeal, stop, turn, heat, whap, inside a helicopter, nothing. Elevator, fan, people around me, coming out of an elevator, boom, double set of doors, boom, double set of doors, boom, another set of double doors. People around me, who are you, what's your name, where were you born, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I was at the burn at Brooke Army Medical Center. Unbeknownst to me and anybody else that was involved, the hospital commander at Hamilton, when all this was going on, he was calling up and down the West Coast to try to find an airplane to get me to San Antonio to the burn unit. Broken, too far away, he was told. Now, in September 70, I can jump ahead because of the context of the story. I'm laying in my bed, the first aisle on the ward, my blue pajamas, all the biological functions are being taken care of by pans and bottles, and I couldn't move and couldn't turn over. I weighed about 135 pounds, and here comes this guy walking down the aisle from the renal lab, the back of the ward, and he dressed in his white scrubs, and I'm half asleep. My bed elevated a little bit. He said, "Hey, Captain Burke, how you doing?" I said, "Who the hell are you?" He pulled up a chair and sat down and talked to me and told me I'm Special 6 Beaver, and I took the phone call at Travis. I said, "No shit." Proceeded to tell me the story that for 5 years to that point, a GO team from the burn unit would go from San Antonio to Tacoma to Tachikawa Base, Japan. This is 1970. Vietnam was still going hot and heavy. Get the kids, the young guys, the burn victims, survivors, most of them were Marines, off the hospital ships and out of the triage units, out of Tachi, put them in the back of C-141, fly across the international date line, Wake Island, land at Travis at about 0900, alternate Mondays, twice a month for 5 years. Our plane crashed around 0820, 0830 on Monday, May 4th, 1970. That airplane was on the ground at Travis, en route to San Antonio. If the hospital commander hadn't called and found that airplane and they diverted over, he told me we topped off the tanks and he come over and picked you up. My surgeon at the burn unit, Brooke, who just passed away, Welford W. Inge Jr., what a great man. He didn't let me die. He didn't give up on me. So many examples. When he took time to talk to me several times, he told me that if I hadn't gotten the burn when I did, I would have died of the burns and the loss of body fluid at Hamilton probably within 24 hours, even though I was physically fit. So that's a second thread. Should have died at the crash site. Should have died at Hamilton. I wasn't expected to live beyond day 14 at the burn unit. Doc Ains spent about an hour and a half with my ex-wife and my mom outside the ICU early morning, May 5th, and told him day 7 he's going to contract this virus or disease, that this can kill him. He's going to get this on day 8, day 9, day 10, to day 14. We're going to make him as comfortable as possible. Well, Dr. Ernst, what about his broken back? Well, Mrs. Burke, we're not concerned about his broken back. I had tubes in every orifice. I was burned 65%. A little bit more than 50% was third degree. My left hand especially was burned really bad because I don't remember doing it, and many people around me didn't believe me. But I dug my way through a crack in the fuselage of the airplane, although I do not recall doing that. I wasn't thrown out. And my fingers in my left hand were burned onto the bone, 4th degree. I had 38 major operations, 78 units of blood, 12 plasma, 6 platelets. I had a blood clot that was large enough to show up an X-ray and to dissolve. Nobody knows why. I had mucor in my face. There's no cure for it. Dr. Inge, one of the many times he went to my family and said, the only thing I know what to do is to take him back in the tank room, Hubbard tank, and scrape his face and his head with the barber's razor, because it was all around my neck, my face, my scalp. What hair I had, they cut it all off, and then they mohawked me and then cut all my hair. And I fortunately don't remember too much of it, because the mind took me away someplace else to try to get away from the pain. The places that really didn't exist. But he would scrape my face, my head with a barber's razor to get it to bleed. One of my many speaking engagements over the years, I think it was in Texas somewhere. I was probably 60, 65 years old. And I told a story to this group of firefighters and first responders and educators, et cetera. There was about 500 people in the room. I believe it was in Waco or Austin, Texas. And I mentioned the story I just told you. And I removed my glasses and I had a wireless mic on and I said, I'm 65 years old. There was a woman in the audience. There's a woman in the audience that blurted out, "But you don't have any wrinkles." And I removed my glasses and I said, "No, ma'am. I got for free what people pay thousands of dollars for. Mine wasn't an acid peel. Mine was a barber's razor." And I started doing my facial exercises. Laugh, you live, cry, you die. It's the title of my sequel, my second book. I had 2 near-death experiences while I was in the hospital, in a burn unit, in ICU. I spent 89 days in the ICU. And one of the times, many times, Dr. Inge took time to talk to me. I asked him, "Doc, what happens to the guys when they leave here?" Because my family knew of or saw 19 people died the 89 days I was in the ICU. Most of them were veterans, GIs. He said, "George, I don't know. We heal the body. We don't have time to heal the mind." Little did I know how prophetic that was, because there was no such thing as survivor guilt. There was no such thing as post-traumatic stress. And you just kind of live it and learn it and figure out what works and what doesn't. Try not to make the same mistake twice. Think positive, have faith, have a spiritual side to you, mind, body, soul, mind, body, spirit. Eat right, exercise. Surround yourself with people that want you to succeed, not fail as much as you can. Some of the cliches, life is hard by the yard, but by the inch, it's a cinch. When you have to learn how to walk again and stand and feed yourself and go left brain, right brain, that's very true. I shared the story with him, and I chronicle in both my books, that all of a sudden I find myself on this boat, this excursion boat. And I'm with Colonel Shelton, and Colonel Shelton is dead. And he's in his orange flying suit, and our arms are locked. We walked in one side off the deck of the boat. There's this big room with a horseshoe bar, and there's 3 or 4 deep in the bar. And he said, "Come on, George, I'll buy you a drink." And I said, "Colonel, I'm too sick. I'm too tired. I got to go sit down." And all of a sudden, I find myself in the middle of this soda fountain booth. I remember the color of the red vinyl and the table, etc., in between 2 people. I looked to my left, I looked to my right, and all the time I'm getting sicker and colder. And their mouths are moving, and I'm not hearing anything. 15 or 30 minutes later, I don't know why those numbers stick out in my mind. He comes over and says, "Come on, George, it's time to go." And I said, "Colonel, I'm not going with you. I'm too young to die. I don't want to die." And he reaches over and lifts me up over to the table. We lock arms, walk out one of the swinging glass doors, wooden floor, teak, railing, water's calm. It's a tabletop off to the right. There's a wooden enclosed bridge, and about every 6 feet or so, there's a window like the Amish used back home in the areas around Pittsburgh. We start making our way towards this bridge, and I'm getting sicker and colder. And I'm to the deck where the deck meets the bridge, and I have to stop. I break free, and I reach down behind each knee and raise my leg, get back up on the bridge. We lock arms, start walking across the bridge. Now I'm shuffling my feet. I'm having difficulty breathing. I'm getting colder and sicker and colder than I've ever been in my life. And I'm halfway to where I'm going, and I tell myself, I'm too young to die. I've got to break free of his grasp and back where I came from. I grunted with as much energy as I could muster, and I broke free of his grasp. And as I turned, I looked over the horizon, and I saw the brightest light I've ever seen. I smelled the strong, pungent odor of flowers. I walked back to the deck of the boat, and relatively speaking, the sickness and coldness started to dissipate. I turned around and I saw Colonel Shelton and all these other people disappear into this white light. And the second example is I'm looking down a long tunnel, and I see two silhouettes behind the brightest light again, a loud rushing of wind. And there's Freddie Adams and Kenny Yarger in their uniforms. Kenny in his raincoat, Freddie in his blue short jacket. I said, Freddie, Kenny, what the hell are you guys doing here? And Freddie said to me, he always kind of talked out of the side of his mouth. He said, it's okay, Captain Burke, where are you? You need to get better. Never gone. I told Dr. Range this story. And he leaned back. He still had his scrubs on. His mask was around his neck. His bonnet was on. Boots. And he leaned forward and put his arms on his knees and said, told me the story that when I was in the ICU, when I was really sick, I opened my eyes and I was screaming, the light, the light, the light, the light, the light. And they couldn't get me, I couldn't get them to understand the light that I was referring to was spiritual. They thought it was the bank of lights around the bed to try to help you keep you warm, along with the sulfidine and the homograph and the pigskin and the wraps. They were saying, what light, George, what light? And they were moving the lights. I kept getting it more and more elevated in my speech. I kept screaming, light, the light, the light, the light, the light. And they sedated me morphine, and I just went someplace else. I said, what does it mean, Doc? He said, George, you experienced what we call the will to survive. I said, what am I supposed to do? Why me? Why did I survive when all the other guys were burned to death? He said, George, I can't answer that. Maybe someday you'll find out. But he said, I can tell you one thing, you need to find some purpose, a reason for being. You have a choice. We all do. Is you can take this as a negative, you can take this and turn around as a positive. But you can add meaning to your life and find purpose in your life. And that's what I've tried to do the last 54 years. Made mistakes. I'm human. That was one of the things that I had difficulty dealing with, was the fact that I thought I was never supposed to get sick or feel bad or have the emotion of guilt. But I had a double whammy, not only guilt, but maybe saying something to someone or being disrespectful to someone. But I had survivor guilt. I was still trying to figure it out. I'm 81 years old. I'll be 82 in July. And I'm still struggling with what they call post-traumatic stress and survivor guilt. And but I don't dream about the plane crash much. I haven't had a dream about my plane crash with the trees and the noise the trees made going over the leading edge of the wing and hitting and rolling underneath. And I haven't had a dream about that probably in 10 years. So that tells me that I know my mind is still healing. Healing is a process. I've been very blessed. I met Olga in Overland Park, Kansas in 1997. And we got married, and she's been very good to me and very good for me. She takes good care of me, and I hope I take good care of her. I love her, and I have a cadre of friends. I was blessed for years to be able to go travel and speak locally, anywhere from preschool all the way up to university students and firefighters and first responders. I spent 11 years, twice a year, at the Capstone Character Excellence Program for senior midshipmen at the Naval Academy. I was invited 4 years to speak to the second-year cadets, Robinson Auditorium in West Point and in Canada and elsewhere. Written 2 books, The Bridge Never Crossed, A Survivor's Search for Meaning, And laugh you live, cry you die. Burn survivors triumph over tragedy. So I still deal with as I get older, I'm dealing with the residuals of the crash and the fractures and spinal issues and other stuff. But I'm glad I'm alive. And I'm glad I'm here with you folks. And I'm very blessed to have Captain Bill in my life. As I told him yesterday afternoon, that Chesty Puller is mighty proud of him. So there's a lot of other threads to my story, but I thought now might be a good time permitting, that if you'd like to ask me some questions, nothing's too personal.
Great. Thank you so much, Captain Burk. We appreciate you being here. Everybody give Captain Burk a round of applause. And unfortunately, Patricia had to leave and Bill did as well. He was thank you for joining us today. And as a burn survivor myself, I was in Grease Fire, November 22nd, 1977. Still remember the day, but not nearly as burned as you. It was only 30% second and third degree burns only. But I spent my time in morphine heaven there. Don't remember much about it, and the silver sulfadiazine and all that good stuff. So we appreciate your story. I do, and your courage. So I'm going to open it up for questions. If anybody has a question, please raise your hand or.
I still fly. I don't anymore. I'm not traveling anymore, but I still fly. Some of the questions young people have asked me over the years.
Yeah, I do have one question.
Yeah.
The plane wasn't that high. I think it was, 3,000 feet or so. Why did it decompress? Did they identify what caused the crash?
Yes, eventually they did. It's another thread to the story that I was out here before. I met a man who was an accident investigator. He was also a professor at ASU, School of Engineering. And I was going through his office files, working for him in the summer. And in the box of accidents, I come across This Coast 57, Hamilton Air Force Base, 4 May 1970. I went, you got to be kidding me. It was my plane crash. And this was 1979. And initially I thought it was the infamous pilot error, bird strike, unknown. But eventually they came to discover, because there was only one engine and a vertical stabilizer, the tail, that was all that was left of the aircraft. Everything had been burned. That going through accident reports, maintenance reports, the airplane had been written up before with a pressure problem, issue with the pressure system on the airplane. And I found out just from a fellow that called me out of the blue about 4 years ago. He was on an air policeman, ran security at the site for the first couple of days. And he told me that a contributing factor that he was told was the door, the window door where the pilots sat, was not the proper door for that airplane when they maintained the airplane. So I know the airplane had been written up before because of a pressure system on previous flights on that aircraft. So the consensus was that there was a pressure problem. The airplane had never been maintained, hadn't been maintained, fixed properly. And it was the numbers just added up. That was the day and the time when all the poor maintenance would come to being and blew up. It's like a balloon. Mm. So bad maintenance, improper maintenance.
That's a shame. Yeah. Well, thank you. Hugh Tuck, I see your hand.
Hi, George. Good to see you again. So the plane didn't decompress, it overcompressed. It exploded. Yeah.
Exploded inside out. Yeah. It was like a balloon.
Wow. They're not designed for that.
No, I
Wow.
I don't think they are.
And you said you don't have any nightmares, huh?
No, sir, not anymore. The nightmares I have are just probably like anybody else has: strange people, strange places. Who are these people? But no, I haven't had a dream about the crash itself. Maybe 10 years.
Wow. Yeah.
My mind's still working. My mind's still healing.
Any other questions?
I do have one, actually. I mean, first of all, George, thank you for joining us this morning. And
thank you.
Just really an amazing story. And, afterwards you're like, well, let's give George a hand. And it's just kind of almost like, how do you, all I can say is I'm just amazed. But you talk to kids, right?
Yes.
And kids have such great insights. And I'm just curious if you could share some of the questions that they ask and why they're meaningful to you.
It's a good question. Thank you. That was based on if I'm invited again somewhere. That was the crux of my agenda. I went over the questions that asked of me over the years. Probably 90%. There's 6 or 7 of them. I don't have them really memorized, but mostly from younger students. And they were, do you still fly in an airplane? Okay. What's it like being burned?
Oh, my God.
What do you remember? Did you do it over again? Do you believe in God? And there's 1 or 2 other questions that escape my mind right now. But I found getting out is being able to be invited to speak through people that heard me invite me, pass my name on to someone else, and they call me and then they pass. That's how it's been for me for 40 years, pretty much by recommendations. And I found that 2 things. Number 1, my speaking, my sharing, the story honors those that work diligently to save my life and honors the men that didn't make it and their families. And it's therapy for me. It's sort of like going out and running a marathon. It's a chemical release, sharing the story that helped me emotionally, the mind, body, spirit, soul. And when I was blessed to be in the audience of school children in an auditorium, 1 through 6th grade or 9 through 12, they're brutally on. You're right. They're brutally honest. They force you to deal with the issue, and they can spot a bullshitter a mile away. They know if you're lying to them. They know if you're not telling them the truth, and they know if you really don't believe in what you tell them. And I was very honest with them because I have to be honest with myself. You can't take a number 2 eraser off the end of a pencil and in the mind and say, "Oh, it never happened." Well, it did happen. So they're honest. Their honesty helped me come to more emotional grips with what I was going on in my life. One of the many examples I had, I was at a church school, a retreat at a small Baptist church in Shawnee, Kansas, which is 8 miles from where we lived in Overland Park, Kansas at the time. They had the basement. This is before my video was produced in 2001. So prior to that time, I still have a carousel of slides of the crash site and Mr. Davio and me. And depending upon the nature of the audience, their age, some I wouldn't show, but all of them I showed to the first responders and Phoenix Fire Academy and other academies where I spoke about equipment utilization and follow the procedures. So I spoke and I showed the slides, told my story. I had a briefcase. I was going back to work. I was still gainfully employed. I had my suit. And this young man, he was about 15 years old. He came up to my shoulder. And I was getting ready to leave to walk out of the basement of the church, up the steps. And he said, "Can I carry your briefcase?" I said, "Yes, sir, you may. Sure, thank you." So we walk up the steps, walk out to the parking lot from the side of the church, and he hands me my briefcase, open my car. He looks up to me and he said, "You know something?" I said, "What's that?" He said, "I really respect you." That was 1989. I often thought about that young man who is now a father and a grandfather. And the impact that what he told me when he was 15 years old, that he respected me. And it's the voice in my head said, "You must have done something right. You hit them. You struck a chord. And if he respects you, that's even more reason why you should respect yourself."
Very cool. Well, George, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting adjourned here. And I want to thank you for speaking with us.
Well,
very and inspiring presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, folks. I enjoyed it. God bless you all. Good luck.
Well, everybody have a wonderful week, and we'll see those that are going to be at the dinner on Friday and those at the breakfast on next Wednesday. So everybody have a great week.
God bless you, George.
Thank you, ma'am. He does every day. God bless you, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.